Huh. We have to discuss about analyze. You may get a question like this in your exam. Analyze recent development in the feudalism Tibet. One thing you have to keep in mind. You must have heard about Dadabhai Naroji, the grand old man of India, who
Sir,
wrote the theory of drain of wealth. Nationalist leaders from Dadabhai Naroji to Tilak to Mahatma Gandhi have emphasized the destructive consequences of the inflow of British manufactured goods into the country. I have already made it clear in the WhatsApp the group I have sent, and the most important thing you have to keep in mind, one of the key issues taken up by the 19th century nationalist intelligentsia, I mean to say, was the question of deindustrialization of India in the colonial period. You know, British established an empire in India that we call the British Empire in India. India was a colony of the Britishers. The British cotton textile industry was blamed for the flood of British goods into India, which led to the decline of traditional artisanal production and the decline in the earnings and employment of spinners and weavers, especially the farmers. I mean to say, Britishers were held responsible for the disruption of the traditional economic structure of the country. And if we come to the ultimate conclusion, there have been certain differences of opinion among the historians of the Indian feudalism school too. Kemiti, how D.N. Jha, for example, he has told he had found inconsistency between the local of the evidence of the notion of a Kali, Kali Yuga. There are four yugas, Satya, Dwapara, Kali Yuga, and site of the crisis, which as Kali Yuga indicated. The evidence came from the peninsular India. Of course, it is not a thing that you should also keep in mind. Just keep in mind the Britishers were held responsible for the disruption of the traditional economic structure of this country. They started exploiting India not from the point of view of economic development. Each and every system of the Indian context was controlled by the British Indian administration. Then we have to discuss what is the relation between feudalism, trade, and urbanization. The very important question. I mean, the basic structure of the Indian feudalism thesis. We can call it in that way. The basic structure of the Indian feudalism thesis, that is antagonism between trade and urbanization on one hand, and feudalism on the other remains untouched. That means the feudal lords or the feudal people started controlling the Indian economy to a greater extent during that period. And the most important thing, suppose, I mean, we can take into account, suppose you can say, uh, uh, medieval Europe. Medieval, let's take an example of the medieval Europe. I mean, almost anything could perform the functions medium of exchange. That is what is medium of exchange count pila. Now money, a certain quality, a measure of particular grain, whatever you may call it. In India, what happened, you know, through the tradition of coverage as a medium of exchange has recently attached the attention of historians. I mean to say, and the fact that procuring coverage actually involves long distance trade. I mean, dura desa, dura jagare jo banijya kariya katha kahuchi. For the cowrie sales were obtained from the far of Malad, which highlights its significance. That means that you can, I have also written that point in the notebook, that what I have already said. And another important thing you have to keep in mind, what was the Asiatic mode of production? Essentially, by the students, a concept developed by the Karl Marx and what's his name, Friedrich Engels. It nevertheless incorporates several elements drawn from the widely prevalent European image of Asia as the antithesis of Europe. I mean to say, in this image, Europe was perceived to have been an triumphant march of progress owing to rationality, science, and technology. Because the industrial revolution started in England first. Asia, suppose, on the other hand, was perceived as still unchanging, lacking in history. Karl Marx, ascribed this changelessness, you can call it, in Asia to the absence of a private property. Consequently, what happened? There were no class struggles here. The motor in this view of progress. The Asiatic mode of production has come in for some sharp criticism, especially at the hands of Marxist historians of China and India. These are the most important things you have to keep in mind. Another important, you may have short notes in your question paper, crusades. Suppose, what's his name? Byzantine ruler Alexius Comnenus, ruling from Constantinople, was troubled constantly by the Turks. तुर्क और कॉन्स्टेंटिनोपल भीतर सबले युद्ध होता they often attacked Christian pilgrims on their way to and in Jerusalem, causing them great distress. बहुत टेंशन सेमान दौले सेमानु. अच्छा, you must have heard Pope Urban II on that pretext declared a holy crusade to reclaim the holy lands from the barbarian Turks. They call the Turks as barbarians. Lebanon and southeastern Turkey, जोड़ा कहूछ तमे, Syria, modern Israel आउ हेडा होची Syria पार्ट सब. Crusades lasted केते दिन पिला चलला जानिचो 250 वर्ष. Altogether there are 6 major crusades in a period from 176 years, जोटा कि हमरो 1095 टू पिला 1095 to 1271. Next we have to discuss what are the role of merchants and characteristics feature of guilds, business community in North India. 350 ରୁ 50 ଭିତରେ कोण हम टिके देखिबा. पिला माने, my dear students, an idea of the character of these guilds, may be formed through a critical analysis of the combined testimony of Law Digest, inscription, and other sources, which were concerned in different ways their working and composition. Suppose members of a craft guild tended to belong to one caste. Crafts were handed within a family, and marriage ties, and brought such families together as a caste, jati jota कहूछ. But these were varying levels of expertise. Now where, for important thing that you should keep it in mind, the masters were identified as acharya, teachers, to whom others would flock as apprentices. Four stages of reaching perfection in a craft were recognized, and the trainees apparently learned at the job while making a living out of it. The most important thing, just remember it. The affairs of the guilds were managed by a small group of its more influential members. Next important thing, these guilds were mutual help associations. Mutual and membership of which was meant to provide insurance against misfortune. Another remember it. These guilds were mutual help associations. The membership of which was meant to provide insurance against misfortune, natural calamity, and oppression. And next point, you have to keep it in mind. There is a good evidence to show, that a number of artisans in early medieval India worked in conditions of dependence on merchants, even though no hint of any such dependence is seen for the majority of the artisans and their groups. It is also an important thing. Finally, we have to see what a reference now. The reference to a merchant chief subjecting, suppose the blacksmith, sawyer, barber, potter, and the like to forced labor is a clear statement on the subordinate position of some of these artisan groups. ମାନେ ବାଧ୍ୟ କରି ଲୋକଙ୍କୁ ମଧ୍ୟ କାମ ସେମାନେ କରାଉଥିଲେ. Details of the nature of the dependent status of the artisans, however, remain to be worked out. ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ତାକୁ ଆମେ ଦେଖିବା. Next important thing, you may have get a question like this: what was the organization of craft production during the medieval period? How the craft product of production was made? My students, to understand the craft production, begin our study with the most basic of the iron age crafts. I mean, that is ironsmith. As with so many other crafts, we get no more than fleeting glimpses of it through the curtains of the sources. Sometimes, students, it is in the form of the presence of the blacksmith, whether in a West Indian village getting his due of the harvest as in the or at the very limits of rural society in a forest settlement in North India. Of course, it is already mentioned in Harsha Charita, जोटा कि होइतला पिला हर्षवर्धन समय. Very interesting thing पिला, a good general index of the iron craftsman's excellence is seen in the fame of Indian swords abroad. भारत वर्षर खंडा कौन विदेश को जाउला. Several centers for making, ये जो माने खंडा कथा पिला माने कहली, which are recorded in the literary sources at home. खंडा पड़ा से माने बाहर को मध्य पठे दोथले. A major source of gold, सुना, in North India was the gold bearing sands of the rivers, the most important of them in this respect being the Indus. जोटा काले हम कथा होतले Indus बा सिंधु आमे जो आमे कहउछे. तापरे next we have to analyze it. Stone, earth and wood provided material for a number of important crafts. कौन से गुड़ा पिला ना stone masonry, sculpture, छोटा सेटा कौन कहउछंती, lapidary, pot making, brick making and carpentry. ये पिला कोट हम जानुचे. Now all these are attested in varying degrees of scale and details for different regions. Next comes it a very a bit critical study हम करियो पड़िबाकू. There were the crafts that derived from primary production in the countryside. Countryside कहले जो तंतो पिला, textiles, oil जो तेल, oil processing, sugar चीनी जो आखरु बाहर, oil processing, तापरे जो देसी liquor making and जो leather जो 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 पता leather work, ये सब जिनिस मध्य important तबा पड़ियो. तापरे a significant development in cotton crystal technology took place during our period. Some period सेटा develop कला. The cotton gin came between the 6th and the 10th century to be fitted with both crank handle and worm gear, so that separation of cotton fiber from seeds and other waste material could be done far more efficiency. Next, पिला माने ଆମେ early medieval लो गोटे कथा
सर इंडस्ट्रियल रिवोल्यूशन
या ठीक स्पिरिट अछि गोटे मने पड़ जाउ के कहि दे. द early medieval कथा कहउतली. The early medieval sources provide list of great variety of textiles. कौन छोड़ा पिला of cotton as well as of wool, जोटा कहउछो सानेम, silk and जो मुंडो जो केस जो चुटुड़ा सुने जो artificial. There have probably been no systematic comparisons in detail of these with the types of mentioned in the earlier sources. It is just accurately मनोचित में लिखिले, you will be catching good marks. तापर आउटा कथा जो wheel जो चक्र, as the word चक्र I mean wheel for the oil mill, जो तेल चक्कर तेल पेशा है तेल, in the Manusmriti के हमें देखिवा जदि and the Mahabharata जानथिबो Mahabharata shows the oil mill employing rotary motion had been in use since early first millennium AD at least. এটা out of ଭଲ ପିଲା ମଧ୍ୟ କଥା ତମେ ମନେ ରଖ oil mills ନା ନାଇଁ ଯୋଉ ଭାଗବତ ପିଲା ପଢିଥିବ ଭାଗବତ ଜାଣିଥିବ ତ ଭାଗବତ ପୁରାଣ gives it a fuller name Toilantra Chakra. Oil means came to be such a regular feature of common life that to speak of a machine yantra was to speak of an oil mill. এটা এটা আমাରି ଦେଶର କଥା ପିଲା କିଛି ନାହିଁ ଜଷ୍ଟ ଟିକେ କ୍ରିଟିକାଲ ହେଉଛି କାରଣ ଏଗୁଡ଼ା ସବୁ ତମେ ଆଗରୁ ପଢିନ କୋଉମାନଙ୍କର ହିଷ୍ଟ୍ରି ବି ବିଏରେ ଥିବ ନଥିବ ତେଣୁ ତମେ ଯୋଉମାନେ ନୂଆ ପିଲା ବି ହିଷ୍ଟ୍ରିରେ ପିଜି କରିବାକୁ ଆସିଛ ସେମାନଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ଟିକେ ପ୍ରୋବ୍ଲେମ ହେଇପାରେ another important thing देखिबा ये जो प्रोसेस हो पिला माने मु कहली the details of these processes which are thus far remain unknown to historians of sugar industry have happily been revealed by a recently found fragmentary document in China dated to 9th 10th century AD which refers among other things to the working of human called the sugar press जोटा कहउछो by oxen माने बलद गाड़ी रे जो चीनी उत्पादन the device seemingly being kullu ताकु आ जाए reference to several varieties of liquor as well as a liquor makers points to liquor making to have been a widely practiced the most vital point preparation of hides and the products in rather partially represented in our sources. An inscription from central India refers to one so many while another is seen and these are the sources from which we get information. Another thing, the hides were mostly those of the domesticated animals in all probability. However, as some reference suggest skins of wild animals too must have been regularly used in leather work. And पशु मानकर चमड़ा को लेदर वर्क मध्य व्यवहार करा another the most important question एटा पिलवान टिके बुझियो चेष्टा करो I have sent to the word WhatsApp state claim on agrarian society during the Middle करी मु हाथ रे से कागज भी अछि number 1 advocacy of royal ownership has meant a near wholesale denial of present rights in land. Far from being a passive recipient of revenues, the state maintained a vigorous presence in agrarian economy with a view to exploiting to the full as it claims. Next comes individuals. Individuals and collectivities thus held land on condition of keeping it productive to a stipulated degree. So, in virtue of his general lordship of the entire territory of being a bhupati, bhupati, mane bhu jaman ka je bhupati, the king claimed a share of all kinds of produce on his land, including forest wealth. माने हमरो अरण्य संपद को से छाड़ नथले. So in virtue of the king also being a narapati, bhupati narapati, raja jo कहउछ, the state made two more sets of demands, exercising general lordship over the subjects, all of whom were subject to obedience in definite terms which were generally incorporated among the legal norms. So as an adage in and is an inscription put in, the king was enjoined not to confiscate the land properly maintained by good or harvest people. In it, they were found to be deviating from proper behavior. The state would not generally take back the land. It would fine them for the misconduct. So these fines were as important means of income to the state as it went about regulating the social order. So माने खंड फाइन ताऊ कहउछे फाइन ओडिया कोन होबो के जाने फाइन दउतले बा तांगु दंडित करउतला फाइन दे जाउतले. So by virtue of its lordship over the people, the state also arrogated to itself the right to demand service from them in a variety of ways. मान लोकंटू सेवा भी नउतला एक्सप्लोर करतला लोकंटू सेवा नउतला. This forced labor जो जबरदस्ती काम करिया कथा labor was extracted everywhere and was commonly known as poida बोली कहउतले ताको ancient India रे. In Kashmir it was called barodhi. In you can see the books, different state provisions have different things for all these things. Another most important question we are going to discuss, the subject of land ownership in early India. जो जमी मालिकाना सत्ता कौन थिला? Students, the subject of land ownership in early India has often been debated, with some historians arguing for royal ownership of land, others for individual or private owners. However, this confusion of evidence and thus of interpretation is not insoluble. It is not correct to ask whether the state or the individual groups own land, because in fact both owned land concurrently, but how differently. It was thus a case of co-extensive rights. In fact, before magisterial survey of the question, this had been, realized by a long line of distinguished scholars like Wells, Dobels, Emerson, Patton, Chalmers, and Wilson. All are European historians. एटा टिके पिला मन रख जोटा कहूची टिके तुम अभी बही रे पढ़ी परिबो. Among these multiple owners, देखली multiple ownership समस्त थिला. Among these multiple owners, nevertheless, one was clearly understood to be the owner with the overriding rights, and these were, as an historian speaks, the individuals and the groups that had cultivated lands in their possession, that is the peasant masses and landlords, who were regarded principally as owners. They held the title agama, literal lawful acquisition. Man ainigot bharave semanka adhikar setaku semane pautile. So this ownership of land by the subjects is not negated by terms like Bhupati, Lord of the earth, mane Prithvira Raja, and owner of the land for the king. These terms refer to the distinct claims of the state. Eta ko एक छोटिया कथा दिया आपको मन रखिए मतलब एवरेज 5-7 हेड लिख देले भी you will be getting good marks. Another important thing, various types of land grant जो भूदान लैंड जो लैंड ग्रांट्स मेडिवल पीरियड रे साउथ इंडिया रे दक्षिण भारत रे कोन होतला. द रिसोर्सेस पिला माने that were drawn of the rural world by the state to non-rural areas made the countryside so much the poorer in themselves. They would not have affected the nature or stratification in agrarian society. So if taxation was regressive, as it seemed to have been, it could not have depended the fishers. Regressive taxation means that the burden of state demands was shared unequally, more by the less privileged majority than by the well-to-do strata. Dita class thila bala no thila bala. So in early medieval politics, local notables such as Maha Tarasbatam Kwajautla were routinely associated with state administration. Though this direct involvement and general influence, they would have tried with success to manipulate the incidence of taxes in their own favor. In this way, but so there are people and institutions whose land was officially either exempt from taxation or taxed at a concessional rate. You can find numerous records like this. Another important thing, as you can say, the significant presence of the state personnel in the villages is seen in many other ways. There is that pointed expression in the different parts of the historical process. 2 points may be noted. पिला मैं आपको conclusion करिवा केमन सिद्धांत करिवा दीटा point. The reference is to plot of land, not a village. I mean, which makes it clear that entry does not mean trespass, but denotes the obligation to serve the visiting of pressure. And तुम land ता पाखरे तुम सबळे loyal हिकरी पिला रहियो. Second, ये जो obligations पिला, these obligations, the obligation to maintain an elephant or imply not only deliveries in kind, but also labor service. माने टंकारे दबो जिनिसर भी पिला तांकु तुम दबो. A crucial feature of stratification in the agrarian society was thus a cleavage between what may be called the state class and the rural populace. गोटे पूरा राजकीय श्रेणी थिला, गोटे गाँव लोक थिले. तापरे a very small number of references to royal land in the inscription, so that the government at times owned land and got it cultivated as a private landowner still. Heidi, sorry, Dominic, state, what are the most important way act of society in medieval India? Change kala. The details of the transfer in this course not recounted in a uniform manner all over throughout. Variations are seen, in fact, among the chapters of single regions or dynasties as well. जो मैंने वंश प्रतिष्ठा करते हैं.
सर वॉइस दबी जाउची सर, नॉट ऑडिबल प्रॉपर्ली.
हाँ अच्छा, एटा मध्य माने कोन होतला वेरिएशन होतला. It is also possible to discern variations over time and space in the mode of making demands. देखो गोटा जेहेतु there is not a stable social stratification, natural the problems will हबो ही हबो. तो ultimately हम कौन conclusion करिवो? There are thus fair grounds for supposing a tendency to increasing burden of state claims. ସେମାନେ ଅଧିକା ଲୋକଙ୍କ ଠାରୁ କ୍ଲେମ କରିଦଉଥିଲେ. ତାପରେ ଆଉ ଥାପିଲା major pattern in the occurrence of certain key terms have been discovered by Sharma, a historian, which need to be noted and for କାହିଁକି ନା ଯେତେବେଳେ state ରେ force labor କରୁଥିଲା, ଜମି ଦିନ ନିଜେ ଆଣିକି ଚାଷ କରିଦଉଥିଲା, ଏତେ କଥା ଯେତେବେଳେ କରୁଥିଲା, natural the armed जनता जो common people, they have to suffer na under any circumstances. So we cannot take it for granted. It was a sound and stabilized economic system that is to be taken out in the interest of the people. So the privileged class enjoyed all sorts of facilities and amenities in comparison to the common people. Very interesting कथा बर्तमान गोटे पिला में पढ़िबा जे ब्रह्मदेव ग्रांट कौन थिला साउथ इंडिया रे. ब्रह्मदेव ग्रांट होच पिला, इट इज एन इंटरेस्टिंग जिंस. एटा टिके पिला सुनो, लिसन, गिव ए पेशेंट हियरिंग टू माय वर्ड्स. ब्रह्मदेव कहले पिला इट रिप्रेजेंट्स ए ग्रांट ऑफ लैंड either in individual plots or whole village given away to Brahmans, making them landowners or land controllers. कौन थिला पेरर कैरेक्टरिस्टिक पिला? The practice of land grants as a Brahmadeva was initiated by the ruling dynasty and subsequently followed by chiefs, feudal authorities, feudal lords, etc. Brahmadeva facilitated agrarian expansion because kahinki pilamane they were exempted from various taxes or dues either entirely or at least in the initial stages of settlement. ତାଙ୍କୁ ମୁକ୍ତ କରାଯାଉଥିଲା, ସେମାନେ ସବୁଥିରୁ ଏକ୍ସେମ୍ପ୍ଟ ରହୁଥିଲେ, ଟ୍ୟାକ୍ସ ଦଉନଥିଲେ। Another କଣ, also endowed with over growing privileges, ସବୁ ସୁବିଧା ପାଉଥିଲେ। The ruling families derived economic advantage of in the form of the extension of the resource base, ସବୁ ତାଙ୍କୁ ପିଲା ମିଳୁଥିଲା। Moreover, by creating a Brahmadeva, they also gained ideological support from their political power। ରାଜନୀତି କରିବେ ନା, ଦେଶକୁ କଣ୍ଟ୍ରୋଲ କରିବେ, ତେଣୁ ରାଜ୍ୟକୁ, ତେଣୁ ସେମାନେ ତାଙ୍କୁ ଏସବୁ ଦେଇକିରି ତାଙ୍କୁ ନିଜ ହାତରେ ରଖିକିରି ସେମାନେ ସେମାନଙ୍କର କାମଟାକୁ ପିଲାମାନେ ଚଳେଇଥିଲେ। ତାପରେ ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ପିଲା ଶାସନ ସେଇ ସମୟରେ ଡେଭଲପ କରିଥିଲା ଚୋଳ। ଚୋଳ ଚୋଳ ଜାଣିଥିବ, ଚୋଳ ଦ୍ୟାଟ୍ ୱାଜ ଏ ଏମ୍ପାୟାର, ସେମାନେ ପ୍ରତିଷ୍ଠା କରିଥିଲେ, ଭେରି ପ୍ରୋମିନେଣ୍ଟ ଆଣ୍ଡ ପାୱାରଫୁଲ ମଧ୍ୟ ସେମାନେ ଥିଲେ। ଚୋଳ ମାନେ କିଛି they introduced some administrative control which is to be discussed. For example, the Chola from pre-Pallava, Chola, Pallava, Pandya, Chalukya, ଏମାନେ ସବୁ ଥିଲେ। କିନ୍ତୁ ଚୋଳ ମାନେ ପିଲା କଣ ହେଇଥିଲା, ଏଟା from, you can take it for granted, pre-Pallava times, and it is marked by common agrarian process in the Nadu were controlled by the, ତାଙ୍କୁ କଣ କହୁଥିଲେ ନା, Natter assembly composed of the heads of peasant families of Pelalas। ଦେଖ ଜାଗା ନା ଗୁଡାକ ସେ କାହାକୁ ନେଇକି ହେଇଥିଲା କହିଲ ପିଲାମାନେ, ନା ମାନେ agrarian feature and a kinship based on social organization। ଦେଖ କେମିତି ନା, the most important thing, the production processes in the Nandu were controlled by the Natter assembly composed of the heads of the peasant families of Belal। ଶୁଣ, ଯୋଉ କୃଷକ ମାନଙ୍କର ଅଧିକା ଜମି ଥିଲା, ଯୋଉମାନେ ଚାଷ କରୁଥିଲେ, ଯୋଉମାନେ ଟିକେ ଥିଲା ଲଗୁଥିଲେ, ସେମାନଙ୍କୁ ନେଇକିରି ସେମାନେ ଆଡମିନିଷ୍ଟ୍ରେଟିଭ ସିଷ୍ଟମ ଟାକୁ ଇଣ୍ଟ୍ରୋଡ୍ୟୁସ କରିଥିଲେ। ତାପରେ ବ୍ରହ୍ମଦେବ କେମିତି ଇଣ୍ଟ୍ରୋଡ୍ୟୁସ ହେଇଥିଲା ନା, land grants to Brahmins are known I mean from early historic times। ମୂଳରୁ ବ୍ରାହ୍ମଣଙ୍କୁ ସବୁ ଦାନ କରାଯାଉଥିଲା, ତାକୁ ବ୍ରହ୍ମଦେବ ବୋଲି କୁହାଯାଉଥିଲା। Of course, it is only by the end of the 6th century that it assumed an institutional character in the Tamil region। ମାନେ ତାମିଲ ଅଞ୍ଚଳରେ ଗୋଟେ ଅନୁଷ୍ଠାନର ମାନ୍ୟତା ମଧ୍ୟ ପିଲାମାନେ ଦେଇଯାଇଥିଲା।
ସାର୍ ନାଡୁ means farmer group।
ହଁ ସେ ସବୁ ନେଇକିରି କରିଥିଲେ। ମାନେ ଯୋଉଟା କହୁଛ, ଏଟାକୁ ଆମେ ପ୍ରି ଚୋଳ ଟାଇମ କି ନେଇପାରିବା। ଏଟା
ନାଡୁ ବିଷୟ ଟିକେ କହିଦେବେ।
ହଁ କହୁଛି ଆମ୍ ଟେଲିଂ, ଆଉ ଥରେ ଏଟାକୁ କହୁଛି ଯେ ଯୋଉ ଚୋଳ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ପିଲାମାନେ ଆମେ ନବା କେମିତି ନା, from pre-Pallava times and is marked by common I mean agrarian feature and a kinship based on social organization। এটা প্রথম কথা। দ্বিতীয় কথা হচ্ছে the production process in the Nadu ଗୋଟେ ଜାଗା ନା were controlled by the Natter assembly। Natter assembly କାହାକୁ ନେଇକି ହେଇଥିଲା ପିଲା, composed of the heads of peasant families। Clear? peasant ମାନେ କଣ ନା, କୃଷକ ପରିବାରକୁ ନେଇକି ଏଇଟା ଗଠିତ ଦେଲା। ଦ୍ୱିତୀୟ କଥା ହଉଛି ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ କଥା ଆସୁଛି, ବ୍ରହ୍ମଦେବଟା ତମକୁ ଆଇ ଅଲରେଡି ଟୋଲ୍ଡ। ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ପିଲା ମଧ୍ୟ ଆସିଥିଲା ଭାଲାଡୁ ମାନେ ସେଟା କଣ କହୁଛନ୍ତି, ଭାଲାଣ୍ଡୁ କଣ କହିଲ ପିଲା ନା, ଯୋଉ କହୁଛ ତମେ, ଆମେ କହିପାରିବା revenue surveys and assessment of land revenue were systematically undertaken under the Chola in the 11th century। In the process, new and larger revenue units were formed by grouping some Nandus Nadus, Nandu no, Nadus together should have you have got it, and even by partitioning some under different Bhala consider mone ରହିଛି ଗୁଡାକ ଭାଲାଣ୍ଡୁ ଆଚ୍ଛା ଭାଲାଣ୍ଡୁ ତା କଣ ପିଲାଟେ ବୁଝିଦବା ମୁଁ କହିଦଉଛି ତା କନସେପ୍ଟଟା the Bhalandu was an artificial unity and politico-economic division created by the will of a political authority. Author କହିବି the Bhalandu, I mean, was Bhalandu was an artificial unity and a politico economic division. ସେଟା ଗୋଟେ division ବୋଲି କହିବା ତାକୁ କ୍ରିଏଟ କରିଥିଲା created by the will of a political authority. The Bhalandus were named after the kings who created them. जो राजा किए ताକୁ सृष्टि करथिले तांको ना ହେଇଛି. Their organization was also linked with the establishment of a hierarchy of officers and a department of revenue collection. ସେମାନେ ରାଜସ୍ୱ ଆଦାୟ କରୁଥିଲେ which kept detailed records and revenue. ସେମାନେ ରେକର୍ଡ ରଖୁଥିଲେ ଏବଂ ରେଭିନ୍ୟୁର ରାଜସ୍ୱର ହିସାବ ମଧ୍ୟ କରୁଥିଲେ. This department of course was the most impressive of administrative machinery evolved by the Chola for mobilization of resources. ମାନେ ଟଙ୍କା ପଇସା ରିସୋର୍ସକୁ ୟୁଟିଲାଇଜ କରିବା ପାଇଁ ଏଇଟା ଗୋଟେ ଭାରି ଇଣ୍ଟରେଷ୍ଟିଂ ଗୋଟେ କମାଣ୍ଡେବଲ form of administrative wing that controlled the records of revenue and all that. ତାପରେ ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ପିଲା ବଡ କଥା ମନେ ଏଇଟା ଭୁଲି ଯାଇଛି କହିବା ପାଇଁ ଦ ଟେମ୍ପଲ ଚୋଳ ମାନେ ଆଉ କଣ କରିଥିଲେ ଶୁଣ ଟେମ୍ପଲ କହିଲେ ମନ୍ଦିର the temple was looked upon and function as a superordinate instrument or I mean the political apparatus from the 9th century ନବମ ଶତାବ୍ଦୀରୁ ୟାକୁ ରାଜନୈତିକ ମାନେ ଗୋଟେ ଅସ୍ତ୍ର ବୋଲି କୁହାଯାଉଥିଲା ବୋଲି ଅତ୍ୟୁକ୍ତି ହେବ ନାହିଁ. Under the Chola students its role progressively increased and diversified. Thereby foregoing institutional links for territorial sovereignty. ଦେଖ ସାର୍ବଭୌମତ୍ୱ ପାଇଁ ମଧ୍ୟ ମନ୍ଦିରକୁ ସେମାନେ ଗୁରୁତ୍ୱ ଚୋଳ ନବମ ଶତାବ୍ଦୀରୁ ଚୋଳ ମାନେ କିନ୍ତୁ ଆକୁ ବହୁତ ସିଷ୍ଟମେଟିକ କରିଥିଲେ. ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ବଡ କଥା ଇଟ୍ସ ଇକୋନୋମିକ outreach channel with a widening orbit through huge temple endowments, land and money grants, gold deposits. ଟଙ୍କା ଏବେ ଶୁଣୁଥିବ କେତେ ମନ୍ଦିର ସବୁ ସୁନା ଅଛି. gold deposits ତାପରେ ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ କହୁଛ merchant interaction through gifts, luxury trade of larger merchant corporations. ଏଟା ପିଲାମାନେ ତମେ you must have got idea କିନ୍ତୁ temple ମଧ୍ୟ it took very an important role. ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ବଡ କଥା ପିଲାମାନେ ରଖିଥିବ it provided footer in royal officials auditing or inquiring into temple endowments. ସେଠି ବସିକି ମନ୍ଦିରରେ ମାମାତି ଫାମାତି ସବୁ ଚାଲୁଥିଲା. ତାପରେ ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ବଡ କଥା ଏଟା ପିଲା how Vallabhas Chaluk Pandyas in South India was emerged and consolidated. ଶୁଣ ଏଇଟା ଗୋଟେ very interesting କଥା ପିଲାମାନେ ମନେ ରଖ. The land grants of the 4th to 6th century AD in Prakrit and the Pariharas which are evidently based on the Dharma Shastric rules. ଶାସ୍ତ୍ରୀୟ ନିୟମ ଅନୁସାରେ ଏଇଟା ମାନେ ବେଶ ମାନେ ଏହାର ବ୍ୟାକଗ୍ରାଉଣ୍ଡ ଥିଲା. Upon the whole even I mean a whole village including garden land was granted and the royal order was addressed to Grama Bhojaka and Grama Eka so ଅଧିକାରୀ ଇତ୍ୟାଦି ଇତ୍ୟାଦି those are the royal officers. କିନ୍ତୁ ଏଇ ଯୋଉ ଚୋଳ ପାଣ୍ଡବ ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ବଡ କଥା ହେଇଥିଲା ବ୍ରହ୍ମଦେବ land କହିଲି ତମକୁ are often seen to be held in shares by the grantees. Another important thing, the temple during the Cholas, which was developed to the extent was to be followed and was to be continued by the Chalukyas of Badami. Chaluk of Badami ବୋଲି କୁହାଯାଏ। ଜାଗା ନା ବାଦାମୀ, ପଲ୍ଲବ, ଚାଲୁକ ଆଣ୍ଡ ପାଣ୍ଡ୍ୟ ଏମାନେ ଡେଭଲପ ଏମାନେ ସାଉଥ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆନ ରୁଲର୍ସ ବା ସାଉଥ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆନ ଡାଇନାଷ୍ଟି ମାନେ ଆମର ଦକ୍ଷିଣ ଭାରତର ବଂଶ। ଆଚ୍ଛା, ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ବଡ କଥା ପିଲା, the nature of land rights under the ଚୋଳଜ। ଚୋଳଙ୍କ ଭିତରେ ଜମି ଅଧିକାରଟା ପିଲାମାନେ କେମିତି ଥିଲା ଆମେ ଏଟାକୁ ଦେଖିବାକୁ ପଡିବ। ମେନ୍ କଥା ହଉଛି ଦ ବ୍ରହ୍ମଦେୟ, ଦେବଦାନ, ଯୋଉ ଦେବତାଙ୍କୁ ଦାନ କରାଯାଏ, ପଲି ସେଟା କହୁଛନ୍ତି କଣ ପଲିଚାନ୍ଦମ, represent the superimposition of superior rights in land and institutional ownership with a corporate body of land holders। ଦେଖ ପିଲାମାନେ ଏଟା ଭାରି ଇଣ୍ଟରେଷ୍ଟିଂ ଜିନିଷ। ତମେ ଦେଖ ଯେ ଆମେ ଦେଖିବା ଯେ ଲ୍ୟାଣ୍ଡ ରାଇଟ୍ସ ୱେର ଷ୍ଟ୍ରକ୍ଚର୍ଡ କେମିତି ହେଇଥିଲା ମନେ କହୁଛ କୁମି Meriatic of National Gem Urbani, it was all a agrarian system being connected with your temple। तापर boundary specifications पिला भी थिला कोन ना boundary specification became essential as also classification and measurement of land due to reclamation of forest and wasteland and the emergence of smaller buildings। तापर चालुक्य ऑफ बादामी पिला माने कोन थिला देखिबा तांकर कोन थिला ना चालुक्य बादामी और राष्ट्रकूट ये दिटा मध्य साउथ इंडिया रे तत्कालीन समय हेतिला। एटा टिके पिला डिफिकल्ट जिंस ताइ मु कहि दउची इन कर्नाटक पिला अंडर दी चालुक्य ऑफ बादामी एटा 6 रु 8 सेंचुरी भीतर हेतिला पिला। एंड द राष्ट्रकूट केते थिले ना 8 रु 10। द लैंड ग्रांट system introduced a similar organization for agricultural villages with the Brahmins as the major landowning group controlling कौन कले से माने cultivation process in the whole system। and there were 3 types of ownership पिला थिला कौन ना complete ownership in common, दुरे part rotation and part common ownership, तापर पार्ट सेवरालिटी एंड पार्ट कमन माने मिसा मिसे करी ये सब से माने कर देथिले। किंतु टेंपल लैंड्स कम पिला कर कहलो टेंपल लैंड्स वर लीज्ड आउट टू टेनेंट्स बट इनटू उत्तम मध्यम एंड एटा कोन कहउछो कनिष्ठ implying a classification among the types of land and tenants undertaking cultivation जब ताको देइके सेवन ताकर चाष बास करथिले। एटा सबुठ बड़ कथा एबे जो कथा मु कहबो जाउची एटा को पिला टिके मन रख। ए क्वेश्चन ता तुम भूतर हुए तो इट इज एक्सपेक्टेड दिस टाइम एतर मु जा देखुतली ए क्वेश्चन ता पडिबो पिला माने देखिलो कोन लिखाई छी agrarian structure of the medieval south india लास्ट सुनछो पिला माने
सर
हेलो सुनो एटा टिके देखो लास्ट क्वेश्चन ता एटा भारी इंटरेस्टिंग आ उटे बुझी जा हेलो ये क्वेश्चन एक्सपेक्टेड हाँ ये क्वेश्चन टा टिके एक्सपेक्टेड लिसन साइलेंट गोटे कथा पिला देखो
यस सर
प्रथम बर्तमान हम जानिया पड़ेगा शब्द हूँ कौन व्हाट आर द सालिएंट फीचर्स ऑफ इंडियन फ्यूडलिज्म यार ऊपर विषय प्रतिष्ठित। एक नंबर पिला हला शुण टिके मन दे इमर्जेंस ऑफ हायरार्चिकल लैंडेड इंटरमीडिएरीज कौन पिला सेटा ना जो ऊपर तल होइकरी जो सामाजिक व्यवस्था थिला ता भितरे सब तुम जान मानी जमानी मध्यस्थी जो शब्द मध्यस्थी मानकर भूमिका सेठी थिला अत्यंत गुरुत्वपूर्ण। आ गोटे पिला सुन another important feature was the prevalence of forced labor लोकों को कौन फोर्स करके बलपूर्वक काम करौथिले। आ गोटे पिला थिला कौन ना growing claims of greater rights over land by rulers and intermediaries peasants also suffered a curtailment of their land rights। कहीं ना ଶାସକ ଜମି ମାଲିକ ମଧ୍ୟସ୍ଥି ଏମାନେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ହସ୍ତକ୍ଷେପ କରୁଥିଲେ ସେମାନଙ୍କ କଥାରେ, ତେଣୁ କୃଷକ ମାନଙ୍କର ଅଧିକାର ମଧ୍ୟ ଛିନ୍ନ ହୋଇଥିଲା। ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ବଡ କଥା, ସରପ୍ଲସ୍ ଯୋଉ କୃଷକର ବଢୁଥିଲା ଧନ ଶସ୍ୟ, ଇଟ୍ ୱାଜ ଏକ୍ସଟ୍ରାକ୍ଟେଡ ଥ୍ରୁ ଭେରିୟସ୍ ମେଥଡସ୍, ବିଭିନ୍ନ ଉପାୟରେ ତାଙ୍କଠୁ ସେଗୁଡା ମଧ୍ୟ ନେଇଯାଉଥିଲେ। ତେଣୁ ଆମେ can come to the conclusion it was relatively a closed village economy. I have also made it clear in my note. Last discussion, in brief, a subject and immovable peasantry functioning in relatively self-sufficient villages but traced by born restrictions. Born restriction कहले was the marked feature of the agrarian economy during the 5 centuries under survey. यदि सर्वे में देखिवा जो वर्ण व्यवस्था बा वर्ण रेस्ट्रिक्शन तांको थिला। सुन पिला माने चांडाळ हमर बापा हमर जमीदार थिला, हम जेजे आगे लोक माने ठिया चलिक जीवेनी, जोता पिंधि जीवेनी, ये जो सिस्टम यूट सृष्टि होता। The theory of the existence of autonomous peasant societies is put forward in opposition to the theory of Indian feudalism. आपको नोड़ी यूरोप रे feudalism थिला, इंडिया रे feudalism थिला, एका कथा, but ये some way or other a little bit difference. तेणु शेषरे according to this theory, autonomous peasant regions called the Nadus, जो तुम पचारथलो बाबू, evolved in South India by early medieval times. They are organized on the basis of clan, jati and kinship ties. तांको भीतर सब जोड़ा जोड़ी थिले. Agricultural production in the Nadus was organized and controlled by the Natar. ताको तो the people, the Nadu. माने people of Nadu को Natar बोली कह जाउथला. Organizing themselves into assemblies. तांको कहतला नाडू मेंबर्स ऑफ दिस असेंबली वेयर नॉन कहतला कौन कहला नॉन ब्राह्मण पेजेंट्स। एति कथा पिला एटा ए विषयटा बर्तन एठी एंडिंग हैला हमर आ कोन
सर सर गुटे क्वेश्चन जे से ए भीतर गुटे स्लाइस सिस्टम ते अछि, से स्लाइस सिस्टम ता कोन है सर? स्लाइस सिस्टम
स्लाइस SLICE सेटा होछ हमर एटा गोटे साउथ मु ताको भी देखुथली, सेटा को तार किछि गोटे डिटेल्स रे गोटे ठीक रे तो मु कहला एटा जिंस मु पाउनी, मु ताको भाबिछि भी भाई, बुझिलो कि सर, किंतु से गोटा एते कंफ्यूजिंग करिसंती ये जो PGM रो सिलेबस टाको माने अन्य मानकर गोटे करचंती अलगा, तुमको गोटे एते डिफिकल्ट सिचुएशन पकई जे ऑफ कोर्स मु तुमको बाटा बतई देबी जे हाउ टू फेस 60%, किंतु एटा गोटे एमती करचंती किछि जिंस गोटे कंफ्यूज से माने कर दैचंती, जोटा कि माने मु विशेष कंफ्यूज न मु ताको बस इफ आई गेट इनटू इट मो गोटे भारी प्रियोकुपाइड भाई लोक माने थ्रू आउट द डे आई एम बिजी। तेणु कौन देखा विल डिस्कस इन द नेक्स्ट क्लास आउ बी कंफर्टेबल ए ग्रुप रे। अच्छा गोटे पिला गोटे आउ गोटे काम कले हबो कि पिला हेलो
कोहंतु सर समस्त सुनछंती
ए जो ग्रुप टा तमे मते पठेइछ MHI-5 या दरे किछि हमें वॉइस रिकॉर्डिंग पठे देले हबो पिला
सर? हबो जी सर, हबो
बढ़िया होंता, माने तुम बहुत कंफर्टेबल तुम होंतो चिंता कर तुम्हें पूरा टोटल मते सुनी पारन बढ़िया। मु आज तुमर से सार हमर जेते भी फोन करथिले तमे कोऑर्डिनेटर फोन करथिले कहले
अजित सर
हां अजित सर। तेणु मु देखुची मु आर क्लास को आमे तो ए मीट रे निश्चय देखा साक्षात हबा पिला हैला। सुनो सुनो किछि ऑडियो क्लिप्स की आज्ञा आज्ञा कहतु हेलो
सर कौन डाउट आपन
कहूनी किछि कोन
सर मोर गोटे डाउट थिला
हेलो
ब्राह्मण एक्सटेंशन रे कुरम रो मीनिंग कोन सर कुरम
ब्रह्मदेय तमरो तीनटा टॉपिक रे अछि ब्रह्मदेय गोटे
आज्ञा
जो तीनटा मु लिखि जो नोट सेट अछि तम देख मु मनस पैटर्न टा दउछि मु तमर जेमिति क्वेश्चन आसीबो सेमति ताकू प्रिपेयर करछि 15 मिनिट आगु करछि डोंट गेट कंफ्यूज्ड जेमिति मु लिखिछि सेमति यू स्टार्ट प्रिपेयरिंग कंटिन्यू करो असाइनमेंट भी सेमति लेखो यू विल बी फेचिंग गुड मार्क्स डोंट गो डीप इनटू द मैटर गले तमर हिस्ट्री थिला बिरे हेलो
नहीं सर आज्ञा नहीं सर
तमर हिस्ट्री बिरे
हिस्ट्री मोर ऑप्शनल
ऑनर्स थिला
सर ऑनर्स नथला नहीं सर ऑनर्स नथला
ना
सर सर जो
ना
मानकर
बोले
ऑनर्स नथि
अधिका
सर कुरमटा विलेज जाए ना
सर
हाँ हाँ सुनो
हेलो
एड़ा तो आमे कथा बा मु गोटे मो सुनो
सर
जो
सर
मानकर ऑनर्स नथिला ସେମାନେ ମଧ୍ୟ ଭଲ ଦେ ଆର୍ ଡୁଇଙ୍ଗ ୱେଲ୍ ମୋ ପାଖରେ ବସିକିରି ଅଧ୍ୟାପିକା ହେଲେ ମୋ ପାଖରେ ପଢିକିରି MA ପାସ୍ କରି ହିଷ୍ଟ୍ରିରେ ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ମୋରି ପାଖରେ ବସିକିରି ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ଦେ ଆର୍ ଟିଚିଂ ତମର ଏଇ ଇଗ୍ନୋରେ ପାରାଦୀପ କଲେଜରେ ଆମର ସେଣ୍ଟର ଅଛି ଜାଣିଥିବ ସେ ପାରାଦୀପ କଲେଜରୁ ପିଲା ପାସ୍ କରିକିରି ଅଧ୍ୟାପିକା ମୋ ପାଖରେ ହେଇ ସାରିଲେଣି କିଛି ହିଷ୍ଟ୍ରି ଠେଇଁ କିଛି ଡଜଣ୍ଟ ମେକ୍ ମଡ୍
ନା ସାର୍ एक्चुअली गोटे हेडिंग टे अछि तो ब्रह्मदेय एक्सपेंशन इन नाडू स्लैश देखि कोरम एंड कोटम अछि
ହଁ ଯୋଉ ଗୋଟେ ଏକ ଚତୁର୍ଥାଂଶ ଲୋକ ନ ଆସିଲେ ସେ ଆମର ଡିସାଇଡ୍ ହେଇପାରିବନି ମାନେ ଗୋଟେ ମିଟିଂ କଣ କହୁଛେ ଯଦି କୋରମ ପୂରଣ ହବ ତାହେଲେ ମିଟିଂଟା ଆମେ କରିପାରିବାନି ସେଇଟା ଦ୍ୟାଟ୍ ଇଜ୍ ଅର୍ ରିଲେଟେଡ୍ ଥିଙ୍ଗ ୟୁ ନିଡ୍ ନଟ୍ ୱରି ଆବାଉଟ୍ ଇଟ୍ ତା ଭିତର ବିଷୟରେ ତମେ କେବଳ ଡାଇରେକ୍ଟ ବ୍ରହ୍ମଦେବ ଦେଖ କିଛି ଆଉ ଅସୁବିଧା ନାହିଁ ସେଇଟା ଡାଇରେକ୍ଟ ଦେଖ ତମର ପରା ସେ ଯୋଉ MHI-5 ର ଯୋଉ ଆମର ବହିଟା ସେ ବହିଟା କଣ ହେଇଛି କି ମୁଁ ଆମ କଲେଜ ଟିକେ ଏପଟ ସେପଟ ହେଇଛି ତାକୁ ମୁଁ ପାଇପାରୁନି ମୋର ଯେତିକି ମୁଣ୍ଡରେ ଅଛି ତାକୁ ମନେ ପକେଇ ପକେଇ ମତେ କରିବାକୁ ପଡୁଛି ତଥାପି ଲେଟ୍ ମି ସି କଣ ଆଉ ଥରେ କହିଲ ବାବୁ ଲେଖା ହେଇଛି
ब्रह्मदेय एक्सपेंशन इन नाडू स्लैश देखि कोरम एंड कोटम
कोरम
व्हाट्सएप
एंड
गुरु सर
कोटम
पठा दीजिए हां व्हाट्सएप गुरु सर पठा
अच्छा
दीजिए
अच्छा
बेटा फोटो किसी
अच्छा ମୁଁ କରିକି ତମକୁ ଆଇ ୱିଲ୍ ସେଣ୍ଡ ୟୁ ୱିଦାଉଟ୍ ଟେନସନ୍ ମୁଁ କାଲି ପଠେଇଦେବି କାଲି ଟିକେ ଆଇ ୱିଲ୍ ବି ଏ ବିଟ୍ ଫ୍ରି ଦରକାର ପଡ଼ିଲେ କିଛି ଭଏସ୍ ମେସେଜ ରେକର୍ଡ କରିକି ମଧ୍ୟ ଆର ଟପିକ ଗୁଡାକ ପଠେଇଦେବି କିଛି କିଛି ୟା ଦେହରେ ମୁଁ ତୋର ନୋଟ୍ କରି ପଠେଇ ପାରିବି ତ
यस सर
ବଢିଆ ହେଲା ଆଜି ଟୁଡେ
यस सर
ଟୁଡେ ଇଜ ଏ ଭେରି ଗୁଡ ଡେ ଆମେ ବହୁତ କାମ ଆମର ହେଇଛି ହଉ
थैंक यू
ପିଲାମାନେ
सर स्लाइड सिस्टम भी देखि देबे सर
ହଁ ସିଓର 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 ସିଓर
थैंक यू सर थैंक यू सो मच सर थैंक यू
थैंक यू सर
सर ଆପଣ କହିଲେ ଗୋଟେ ଏକ୍ସପେକ୍ଟେड କ୍ୱେଶ୍ଚନ ଲାଷ୍ଟଟା କଣ ଆଗେରିଆନ ବୋଲି ସେଇଟା କଣ ସାର୍ ସେଇଟା
କିଛି
ହ୍ୟାଲୋ
ଶୁଭୁନି ରେ ମା କଣ କହୁଛ
ସାର୍ ଆପଣ ଯୋଉ
ଆଉ
କହିଲେ
ଥରେ କୁହ
ଏକ୍ସପେକ୍ଟେଡ କ୍ୱେଶ୍ଚନ ଆସିପାରେ ଆଗେରିଆନ କଣ ଗୋଟେ କହିଲେ ସେଟା ଯୋଉଟା କି ଜଣା ପଡିଲାନି
ଆଗ୍ରାରିଆନ ଇକୋନୋମି
ସାର୍ ସେଇଟା କଣ ସାର୍ ମାନେ ଆଗେରିଆନ ଇକୋନୋମି ମାନେ କଣ ତାର ଅର୍ଥ କଣ
ତାର କଣ ମୁଁ ଲେଖିଛି ଦେଖିଲ ପଏଣ୍ଟ ତମ ପାଖରେ କାଗଜ ଅଛି ଦେଖ ମତେ ମୁଁ କହିଦଉଛି ତମକୁ
ସାର୍ ଆଗେରିଆନ ଇକୋନୋମି ଅଛି
ଶୁଣ 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 ସେଟା ତମକୁ ମୁଁ କହିଛି ଆଗ୍ରାରିଆନ ଷ୍ଟ୍ରକ୍ଚର ଅଫ ମିଡେଭାଲ ସାଉଥ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆ ତାର ପାଞ୍ଚଟା ଫିଚର ଥିଲା ଗୋଟେ ହଉଛି ହାରେଚିକାଲ ଲ୍ୟାଣ୍ଡେଡ ଇଣ୍ଟରମିଡିଏଟ୍ସ ଲେଖା ହେଇଥିବ ଦେଖ ପ୍ରିଭେଲେନ୍ସ ଅଫ ଫୋର୍ସ ଲେବର ଲେଖା ହେଇଥିବ ପିଜନ୍ ସଫର୍ଡ ଏ କଟଲମେଣ୍ଟ ଅଫ ଦ ଲ୍ୟାଣ୍ଡ ରାଇଟ୍ସ ବି ଲେଖା ହେଇଥିବ ମୁଁ କରିଛି ବା ନୋଟ ତାକୁ ସରପ୍ଲସ୍
ଆଚ୍ଛା
ୱାଜ
ହଁ
ଏକ୍ସଟ୍ରାକ୍ଟେଡ ଏଇଟା ଦେଖିଦିଅ ଏଇଟା ଦେଖିଦେଲେ ତମେ କ୍ଲିୟର ହେଇଯିବ ଓକେ ରହିଲି
ହଁ ସାର୍ ଥ୍ୟାଙ୍କ ୟୁ ସାର୍
थैंक यू सो मच गुड नाइट सर
ସାର୍
Bye friends, thank you.